Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, so I'll make a start. Helen, apologies, please.
We have apologies from Daryl Turner and Robin Legg.
And Tony Coombs is here.
Yeah,
indeed.
Hi, morning, Tony. Do I have any declarations of interest?
Yes, Chairman, because in 2 items there is discussion of private landlords, and I actually have one property that I rent out, so I will not be participating in those discussions.
Okay.
Chair, can I raise one as well, please?
Exactly
the same as Pauline's just outlined.
Chairman, how does that figure with the portfolio holder?
That's a fair point, but as you might have to take some legal, but as far as I'm aware, you're not making any decisions here, so I think you should be okay. I'll look to Helen to advice there.
Yes, I think so. Yes.
I don't think that's pecuniary.
No, needs to be okay. Okay, that's right. Okay, let's crack on then. So agenda number 5, which is the Dorset Council Housing Allocations Policy for 2021.
Sorry, Chairman, you forgot the minutes.
Oh, sorry, I have, haven't I? Sorry, can I? Because I'm just desperate to get going. Can we have a look through the minutes of the previous meeting, please? So agenda number 4. Do I have a proposer for that?
So proposed, Chairman.
Fab. A seconder. Fab. And we're all in favour of that as well.
Yeah. Yes. Agreed.
Yeah,
absolutely. Excellent. Fab, thank you. And Helen, I'm assuming there's no public participation?
No, we have none. Thank you, Chairman.
Fab. Okay, all right. Now let's actually get to the business. Agenda number 5, the Dorset Council Housing Allocations Policy. The Cabinet members, Graham Carr-Jones. Graham, would you like to introduce your item, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I will give you under Part 6 of the Housing Act 1996, local authorities have been under a legal duty to have a scheme that regulates the allocation of social housing. It's also a legal requirement for Dorset Council to formally adopt the housing allocations policy by 2022 as part of the structural change order for local government reorganisation. Housing allocations were previously a function managed by district and borough authorities with their own schemes. This policy creates one scheme for Dorset Council. The policy itself will not solve the council's housing need. However, it seeks to house those appropriately within the available housing. There are approaching 6,000 households currently registered for social housing. Now, this figure will change when applications are asked to re-register. It always does. We do not own housing stock, and we work in partnership with social landlords who offer tenancies to households using our scheme. We've worked with a cross-party member executive advisory panel and partners across the organisation and the community to design a new scheme with over 700 responses to our consultation. The scheme lays out a framework that describes how we will manage the complex process of accessing social housing. A lot of the scheme is defined in statute. The new scheme has reviewed and updated the legislative requirements, and it also revises the discretionary provision for managing the allocation of social housing by prioritising households according to their needs, whilst being fair and accessible to all and reflecting our corporate strategy. In order to inform the scheme and determine priorities, we undertook a public consultation, assessments, relevant information and data, and asked people and organisations for their views on social housing. We also asked the National Practitioner Support Service to work with us during the development of the policy. They are a national organisation of experts working with local authorities and have the goal of improving frontline housing and homelessness services. They carried out a desktop review of the policy before and after the consultation and provided feedback, highlighting good practice and offering recommendations for enhancement. We are very satisfied that the process has been inclusive and the housing team have been commended by the National Practitioner Support Service, who recommended our approach as an example of best practice. The Housing Service is currently working with Neil Morland and Co. Housing Consultants, who are an independent company working throughout Great Britain as the leading authority on housing needs, homelessness, housing allocations and housing support. The new policy has been reviewed by their experts and suggested enhancements have been included. And Chairman, it's my intention that your committee will assist in the body of work, if you would permit it, in the new homelessness allocation, homelessness report. Chairman, there will always be some scenario that we have not envisaged, and that is why the members of the EAP sought and proposed a scheme which included flexibility and discretion within its framework. This will allow the service to respond to individual households and circumstances appropriately. This flexibility will also allow us to respond to changes in legislation and guidance throughout the lifetime of the policy with the portfolio holder for approval. For example, new domestic abuse legislation is anticipated in January 21, and whilst the Housing Service is working with colleagues and partners to ensure the policy reflects any new requirements, final decisions are yet to be included. Chairman, the recommendation is that members of the People and Health Overview Committee recommend that this to Cabinet on the 3rd of November 2020, and that they endorse the work of the EAP and recommend it to full council. But just before I sign off, could we put on record our thanks to Sharon Atwater, the EAP and the housing team for bringing this together in a timely fashion. There really has been a tremendous amount of work involved in this, Chairman, and you'll see through my presentation that's coming in a moment some of the work that we've been doing. Thanks, Chairman.
Fabulous, thank you, Graham. What we'll do is I can see that there's been considerable work going in. When I was doing my research, it looks like Dorset Council actually is leading on this, which is good. What I'll do, if I may, is if we'll open it up to some questions, and remember it's the policy committee, so trying to bring out the policy, if we may, committee.
Could I just, would it be helpful to have the presentation before questions, Chairman? I don't know. That would make
more sense. Yeah, if you'd like to run with that. Would you like to? If we don't have any questions during the presentation, and hold all the questions to the end.
That would be, I think, helpful. I've got the entire team are on standby here and looking forward to contributing, Chairman. I think it's Andrew Billany. I don't know who's actually going to present the presentation. I think it's Andrew.
Hello, I'm Andrew Billany, Director of Housing. I'm on standby to do the presentation.
Hello, Andrew. Are you happy to crack on ahead then?
Certainly am. Yeah. Can people see the screen?
No. Can I just ask? We can't. I can see people, but I can't see the actual document.
Yeah, Andrew, are you happy to share your screen?
Right. I thought I had, but just.
I can see you, Andrew, and I can see Tony Alford.
Okay. Says that I've shared my screen. Apologies for this. Try again.
It's Helen. Sometimes it takes a while for the technology to catch up.
Right. I'll try one more time. People can say when they can see it, if they can.
I can only see the agenda, Chairman.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, I can only see George's screen.
Chair, shall I just speak to it? And I think it's because Graham has covered some of the areas that I was going to cover. I can talk to my slides because I think some of it will work verbally. Shall I carry on?
Happy. I mean, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for inviting us. Thanks for the praise also for the team, because I will say I'm relatively new to Dorset. Most of this work has been done. Also, I'd also give praise to Sarah Howe as well. So Sharon Atwater and Sarah Howe has been doing a lot of work on getting this to where it is. So it's quite a complex policy and set of policies, which what I was just going to highlight is, you've all read the report, but just to highlight some of the process, but also the some of the key changes, to draw your attention to that. So what this particularly, there's a review of current policies, clearly as part of this, bringing this together, and we've looked at particular aspects of existing policies and things that have predated this policy. Dorset Home Choice Common Allocations Policy, for example, and also Christchurch and East Dorset Joint Housing Allocations Policy. So there's an element of bringing together existing policies into one. We've benchmarked other local authorities and best practice locally as well as nationally. So Bath North East Somerset Council Home Search Allocation Scheme, Wiltshire Council's allocations policy, and also Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. Graham's mentioned, Councillor Carl Jones has mentioned also a good work with the Executive Advisory Panel, EAP. So 11 councillors have been actively involved, and that was a very positive review, and findings and comments considered and taken into account. So have been agreed changes in the proposed policy brought into being, and we particularly paid attention to experience within Dorset and customer engagement aspects, and the particular focus on making sure we had good geographical spread, so we weren't focusing on one area more than another area. So we've looked hard at that and made sure we were paying attention to the diverse needs of the county and the area that we're dealing with. Draw out some elements of how far we've already engaged on this policy. A major public consultation on the policy, so 20 weeks, including online consultation, hard copies sent out to key stakeholders and interest groups, social media consultation, and also via community radio and newspaper. So we're pleased that there were 766 responses received. So that's a good response for these things, and good overall support for the direction of travel. Just to throw in a bit of personal experience from where I've done this elsewhere, I think that is a very good response to allocations policy. So we're pleased with that. Stakeholder interest engagement with key partners. We carried out interviews and tailored events with social landlords, the local registered providers, and also across Dorset Council with relevant services, adults, children's, the rest of the housing team, and equalities. Desktop review, Councillor Carl Jones has mentioned, we involved National Practitioner Support Service, who did 2 positive independent reviews during the process to validate the content, process and aims, and as Councillor Carl Jones has said, they were very impressed with the process and commended us. Equality impact assessment has been carried out and feedback has been received from DC's Equality and Diversity Officer during drafting, as well as signing off at this stage. I'll briefly say this because you'll have read the report, but it's worth pulling out some key changes. In order to be clearer as a policy, we've changed the name of the banding priorities for housing. So the gold, silver, bronze banding are now descriptive, emergency, essential. So there are priorities that people will understand and relate to more effectively. Harmonisation of local connection. Clearly, we're bringing together different districts and different approaches. Some harmonisation across the range of this policy, but local connection has been part of that exercise, and we're more than happy to answer questions on how that plays out. New legislation has been incorporated, as you'd expect, and we've done some clarification around reasonable preference, where within the policy where we can prefer one area of need above another. So we've streamlined aspects of reasonable preference to make that simpler for people. Again, there's detail in the paper. For more than happy to answer questions. It's worth stressing we've added some new reasonable preference categories, and that includes corporate duty and corporate parenting duty, because I know some members have asked a question about care leavers and what we're doing to help with other pressures on the council to provide housing and options for care leavers. So we've added that as an area for reasonable preference, and we've also improved the process for when people are either needing an adapted property to disability or a change in circumstance, or when social housing tenants are living in a property where they no longer require that adaptation and want to move. So we're trying to make best use of the housing association stock by the allocations policy. I'll probably skate through because I know that I think because you can't see the presentation anyway. I'll just end and open up to questions with just to stress what this policy is. It's primarily an approach which allows us to manage fairly the system of housing allocations, the number of properties we have available to let, primarily from housing association registered providers. It's not a policy which will solve the excessive demand over supply, so it's just worth making that clear. But what it does do is help to inform where we have where we can prioritise future strategies for housing. So if there's a shortage, if we're finding there's a particular pressure on the need for family housing or single people housing or whatever it may be, we will use the policy to analyse and inform future strategies and future conversations with the housing associations. So for years ahead, we can plan for what is provided within Dorset. Apologies for not showing the presentation, but that's probably where I will leave it. Happy to answer, open up to questions, and we have Sarah Howe and Sharon Atwater here to answer them as well.
Fabulous, thank you, Andrew. We've got Pete that's straight in there with the right to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to also add my praise to the document because it's obviously a monumental piece of work that's been done. I've got a couple of questions. One's around how do we know how we're doing, and the other is around our new hostel accommodation. So the first question is, well, just that, how do we know how we're doing? How many residents are going to, and obviously this is, it goes along. So how many residents have we got in each band? How many have we got waiting overall? How many have been housed? How long did they have to wait? Where would this information actually be presented, and at what frequency? So it's just, how is the policy doing? How are we going to regularly monitor it? Where is it going to be monitored? And how are we going to know? And then the final question is about the new hostel accommodation that's coming online for homeless people. Does that fit within this allocations policy? And if it does, again, how are we going to know how we're doing? And for what it's worth, I think the fact we're now going to have our own in-house hostel accommodation is actually great news. So thank you very much.
Andrew, I'll let you answer that one.
I could probably colleagues can help me with the detail, but the overall statistic around how it's doing, we've let last year's figures 1,000 just. Have we lost Andrew?
I think so.
Graham, are you happy to take that on as the portfolio holder?
I can go with some of it, Chairman. Yeah, I mean a lot of, I'd say last year we had about 1,000 allocations that we did. In terms of answering the question for the new policy, Peter, obviously the policy hasn't kicked in yet. So what we're once it's approved, but we have regular monitoring of all of those things. And the banding, we will see changes in the number of people on the register. It always happens. This is not the first rodeo where I've introduced a new housing policy. And I think that with that information will come out. Interestingly, you're asking about how we're going to communicate that. And one of the things I've just come out of a discussion with Andrew Billany about is providing a regular either quarterly briefing to members about what's happening in the world of housing, because everyone's very interested in it. I've had some really interesting offline conversations with members, so that's for the future. In terms of the hostel accommodation, that again hasn't come online yet. It's a work in progress. I think that's all I can say at the moment, Chairman.
Sorry, Peter, are you happy with that answer?
I mean, obviously, it'd be good to see the briefings when they appear, but from my perspective, it would be good to see a regular monitoring and regular reporting of performance, perhaps as part of the dashboard, which we were shown perhaps sort of getting on for 6 months ago, that I believe would be presented to Cabinet.
Chairman, that regular monitoring is done. It is available. In fact, I get the statistics every month, but it may be a bit too much. I think what we need to do is, I mean, we monitor the various housing numbers at the moment through the different schemes. It will be a lot easier to provide concise information when we're down to one policy for the whole of Dorset Council. It's going to make officers' lives an awful lot simpler to provide that information, and it will be there. I mean, that comes. I'll be looking to share a bit of that with the new briefings that Andrew Billney and I talked about putting out. And I think, because I said to him, you know, it's the one area of work that members are really interested in is housing. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think where we could go from this is that there's nothing in the paper regarding reporting. So is there anything we could stick in a policy about the reporting and see where it goes? You know, for instance, you know, if it does go to the online system.
I don't think we want to put it into the housing allocations policy itself, Chairman. I think it's for another discussion.
Okay, I'm happy with that. Peter, I'm going to move on now. Councillor Knox, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chairman. And yes, my question is also about the performance and the monitoring of the success of this policy. And thank you, Graham, and a bit of Andrew for the response. I'm not sure I am quite happy with where that has reached, because we've got a policy here. We need to know what success looks like. So there must have been some basis on how this policy has been informed. And then I would also like to know where the activity is taking place to actually put in some prevention and some analysis of why we do have the numbers we do. So what we want to do is prevent as much as possible those who do reach high level or low level. I'm not sure I quite like the word terminology low, but I'd really like key lines of inquiry, I think, as well as what Pete mentioned, of course, on the dashboard, and the chairman mentioned about performance, because we do need a measurement to see whether this is succeeding or not. I know maybe there's no answer directly today, Graham and Andrew, but with Chairman, I'd like to know what the outcome of this is at the next meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
If I may,
Graham,
I'll defer to officers if they so wish, but I'm not sure that we can give you the performance information of a policy that we haven't implemented yet. I think it hasn't come into being. I think what we're going to see when we introduce the policy to the Dorset public, we're going to see when people are re-registering, we will see those numbers of 6,000 drop significantly, because people that are sat on the register by chance, or that have moved on, or have been adequately housed, or whatever it is, they drop off the register, but they don't tell us. And therefore, I think that once the new policy is in place, we'll have all of that information to hand to provide to members. But we can't give you an update on a policy that has yet to be implemented. I'm asked my officers out there if they disagree with that.
Can I say something?
That's not where she's going. Go on, Rebecca. Go back to it.
I'm not asking I'm asking for the principle, i.e. the structure of how this is going to be monitored, and also the key lines of inquiry. That isn't actually saying we're going to judge a policy before, but actually how it will be monitored from day one. So as soon as it's started. Thank you, Chairman. I'll leave it. I'm not quite sure.
No, I think you've hit a point. I think there has to be a policy in terms of how it's managed and what does good look like. I think it might be that they go away and they come back to us. I noticed that Andrew's back. Andrew, have you got anything to mention on this?
Apologies, but I've probably missed most of this, but I think I'll get the gist. In terms of monitoring the effectiveness of the policy, yes, of course, that's something we will do in terms of how far we're able to run a fair system, but ultimately the it's what I said at the end of the presentation, if you caught it. I think it's about how far, if there are shortages or sort of mismatches within the system, it's about how we inform our wider strategies, wider to some extent planning policies also. I think it's a question for a broader debate. Apologies if I missed the point of the questioning, but it's still I think it's recognising what the policy is. It's primarily a policy which will allow us to manage a fair system. So as far as monitoring that, yes, of course, we'll do that and report back as and when you would like to see that. So if any of my colleagues wanted to join in at this stage.
Hi, Sarah Howe. I think, yes, we definitely need to be monitoring it. I completely agree with that and would be open to any suggestions or discussions about what you would like to see. I think the other thing to point out is that this policy is going to be reviewed annually, so we are going to be keeping a much closer eye on it than we have done on previous policies. And it's hoped with the new system and with new ways of getting people to apply to the register is going to be far quicker, and that is going to make a huge difference. But I think that's the only thing that I'd really like to add to that.
Okay, all right. I think for the
Can
moment,
I just come back briefly?
yeah, go on then, Andrew. Oh, sorry, Pete. So is that you?
Yeah, yes, it is. It's just to confirm that we're not expecting a report of what's actually happening right now. It's just how it's going to be done.
Yes.
So you know, it would be completely unreasonable to be asking for how it's doing when it hasn't even started. So that's it. We just need to know what's going to be monitored, where's it going to be reported, how are we going to know what's going on, and with the key lines of inquiry, that's really good because what the fire service does, and it works very well there.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, and I don't think it's doing any harm to actually just put in a point in terms of within the policy in terms of how it's going to be monitored and where it's going to go to. I don't think that's asking very much at all.
No, happy to take that away, Chairman, and come back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Pete. Stella.
Yeah, I think it's fine, this new policy. I'm quite happy with it. But what the problem is that we're going to ask people to re-register, and you say registration can be done quicker. But if we've got 6,000 people on the list now, and we only allocate 1,000, that's 5,000 people disappointed. Are we going to mention to when people are re-registering that some of it, they will not have much chance to getting a house? Otherwise, they get on the register, they think we've got hope to get a home. And unless they're essential or emergency, it's very unlikely they will get a home. And I think we're giving people hope when there is no hope of them getting a house, most of them getting a house. We've obviously got to get a lot more houses on the stock. That's the most important thing. But I think we need to let people know when they register that they aren't automatically going to get a house within the next few months.
Who'd like to take on Stella's question?
Chairman, I'll take on a bit of it. And I think you're right, Stella. It's about managing people's expectations. In terms of, I mean, the problem we have had historically, when we've had a very low number on the housing register, the challenge comes from our developers that why should they provide 40% affordable on a site when the need is low? I mean, we had this in one of our former districts, and therefore it's about not giving up hope, but yes, being realistic about the housing, people looking at house. That being said, I had some discussions last week about the kind of numbers of properties that are coming down the line, and there's a further 500 or 600 in train already, with more coming up. I think if I was to talk to Paul Derian, he would say that housing provision's in one of the best places it's been for a very, very long time. So I think it's obviously, it'll be interesting to see the numbers that re-register. I think, and at the end of the day, providing housing is based on needs, and I think that's what we have to focus on. And as has been said, you know, this policy won't fix the housing problem, but I think it highlights that if we have a large number on our waiting list, it gives a lot of metal to us to hold developers to account when they're challenging us on viability. We need to prove that we have that need for housing. So it's not about disappointing people, it's about trying to find a way of building more houses and the RPs developing more. But as that's a whole nother story, whereby a big development will come up and then the challenge will be, we don't want that in this area, and so we go on. And I don't want to get drawn into planning, Chairman, but I think it's a very, very big picture. I don't know if any of the officers want to comment on that further, Chairman.
Can I jump in, Andrew?
Yeah.
Just to I recognise Councillor Jones's point around raising expectations, and part of the operational day job of the team is about having conversations with people about their options. So whilst it's people's rights to join the waiting list and wait for social housing, it's also about how we advise people about what else they can do to find their own housing, whether it's privately renting or getting onto shared ownership registers. Or there are other ways forward for some people who have a particular housing need or even aspiration for housing. We can help signpost people into different directions, rather than just saying, well, rather than over promising the prospect of a social housing tenancy, because that won't be a reality for some people on that register, as you've already recognised. But we want to be more proactive as an advice organisation, if you like, around getting people's options to be realistically understood. We want to house as many people as possible, yes, of course, but there will always be, this is typical with pretty much every local authority in the country, there will always be a gap between pure demand and the amount of supply that's available. So the options conversation is pretty key to this as well.
Okay. More questions? Anyone else want to speak? Pete, did you answer your question? You put RTS, but I think you came in, didn't you?
Yes, it's already been covered, Chair. Thank you.
I've got Tony Alford. Tony. Tony.
Yes, good morning, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk about the concept of local connection. And after sort of thinking this through, I think the idea in this allocations paper is that what is meant by local means the Dorset Council area. Now, if you were talking to a parish council, their idea of local is the parish level. And it does seem to me that the policy as a whole really excludes parish councils altogether. Now, I think there is some merit in encouraging parish councils to support the development of new rural housing, and this can be done by giving them the opportunity of nominating people to secure homes from that development. They will normally have a very clear idea of the number of people in housing need and would want to support families being kept together so they can give each other mutual support. So I do feel as though an allocations policy can provide the incentive for parish councils to support new housing developments, and I think that we are perhaps losing that opportunity in this paper.
So it's a good point, Tony. Who would like to take on Tony's points?
I'll talk to a bit of it initially, and Tony, thank you. And I completely understand where your question comes from, Tony, in terms of parish councils wanting that control. I think one of the reasons why we encourage community land trusts is because that's an area where parish councils really can have that control, because it's driven from the community upwards. In terms of our Dorset-wide policy, I don't think it's practical to give the parish council nomination rights for properties. Would be very, very awkward indeed, because they may feel that it's okay to leave a dwelling unoccupied while they wait for someone to come forward or come of age or come to to make themselves available for that particular property, as most especially in some of the very rural hamlets that we've got. I've had some experience in the past where we've built small rural exception sites, and the local connection hasn't been, the people haven't been there, so they've come from out of area, and I'm out of area, I mean from like maybe 5 or 6 miles away, and that does cause some challenges, but I think at the end of the day, this Dorset-wide policy is for that, and that connection is to Dorset. There are, obviously, if the properties have got the 106 on them for rural properties, to make that letting to local people more focused. And I think also we've talked about local lettings plans and things like that within the policy. So I think it's there, but it may not be what the parishes themselves think that they should have. But I'll invite either Sharon, Andrew or Sarah to comment on that further if they so wish.
Thank you, Graham. I think the only thing I would add to that around the Section 106 is that they will continue to be in place as they are now, and any advert would give priority to somebody that's got that connection to the parish. That's not going to change, and any Section 106 is going forward as well will be the same. And you've also got the rural connection to villages. So, I think we are still able to offer that to local people. And what will happen is their housing need can be lower than others and still be actually able to get a property because it's advertised with that local connection.
Thank you, Sarah. Andrew, if I may just add one other bit, I think there is an area in which when the parishes get together, that they could be more give a greater contribution, is that when a development site comes before the parish council, instead of always rejecting it or saying no, it's not, this village doesn't need any more housing or whatever it is that they could support those applications coming before them, and say that's great because we've got needs for X, Y, or Z properties within our parish, and that's where that planning stage, perhaps that's where they need to be feeding in, saying what a grand thing that we've got some affordable housing coming up on a site. Please can we put a marker down for properties 1 to 4 because we've got people waiting. I think that would be helpful, Chairman.
Yeah. I mean, I really take Tony's point on board, and I think yeah, we are stuck between a rock and a hard place. But I think that there is the scope for parish councils as stakeholders to have more of an input. Perhaps you're right, back towards the planning stage. But I noticed that in the policy it does actually refer to I think the RSLs have got to contact Dorset Council within 6 months of a scheme or something like that. But I think we need to be able to implement a way that the parish councils can influence the 106 in relation to the local policy, and there doesn't seem to be anything there. I think so I threw that back to you,
Chairman. I would say that's absolutely through the planning process, not through the allocations policy. Okay, well, it's something that we can as a group we can highlight as a potential policy and push on through to the right director. I think it's all good. Do you have anyone else? I think. Sorry.
Yes. Can I have a follow-up, please?
Sorry, Tony. Of course you may.
I think there are 3 points. Firstly, I was only talking about the first letting of a property. I wouldn't expect any continuing nomination rights. The second point is about Section 106, and parishes have no control over whether Section 106 is produced or not produced. So there is something there that doesn't seem to work sufficiently well. And then finally, on the say that parishes may have, now there was a case referred to in the last meeting of full council where a parish, in fact in my ward, has clear policies about the sort of housing they are seeking, particularly for smaller size, affordable housing. But does the planning system deliver it? No, the answer is it just doesn't. So I think there is a real problem there that as a council we do need to address.
Would anyone like to address Tony's ongoing questions?
I don't think it's. I think it's a question of noting the comments, Chairman, and when we're all being asked to feed in our comments to the new forthcoming Dorset local plan, and it is through the planning process that we need to secure this, not through an allocations policy. An allocations policy is that allocating the houses that we have, getting them built sufficiently in the right areas is a whole new different ball game that we've all come across in our years as councillors and members of getting properties built out in the right areas.
Well, there's nothing to stop this panel from making a recommendation to go across to the policy EAP across to David Walsh. So I'm quite happy to do that, Tony, if you're happy to do that. Yeah, in terms of addressing
that would be very useful, Chairman. And again, just
addressing the 106.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, are you happy with that? Is everyone else happy with that?
Yep.
Okay. Do you have any further right to speaks? Well, I'll go ahead now, as it's my prerogative. I think where my concern is that the policy is excellent. It is good, but the allocations policy is just purely a snapshot of that one person, as they are in their life then, or one family. And I think that where we differ as Dorset Council to other councils, that many councils have incentive schemes to be able to look to see how they can ensure that as time goes by, that people are living in the right property. So, for instance, say if you've got a couple living in a larger property, to ensure that property is freed up, or to incentivise that property is freed up. And I know that they do it elsewhere. I think one of them could have been Blackpool. So how do we sort of revisit and incentivise people to for instance leave a larger home, thus bring it up? Really, I think that's my challenge.
Chairman, we need to build lovely blocks of retirement flats, or bungalows by the seaside. That works very well indeed. I mean, I'm serious. They did this in Swanage not so many years ago, and freed up an awful lot of property because you're incentivizing people to go somewhere that they'd like to be. It's very difficult when you've been in a home for 30 years, you've brought your family up there, you've dug the garden, you've nurtured the property, to then move on, and it's a real challenge, and we don't have powers to ask people to leave their 3-bedroom houses and free them up for family homes. There have been some incentives by the RPs to do this, where they'll pay the moving costs, put in new carpets, do bits and pieces. But actually to encourage someone in their later life to move is very difficult because they don't want to. It's their home as they see it. They're settled there. Some want to downsize. We have the home swap registered to if you want to downsize, but in the main, I'm afraid you will find that as people get older, they rather not move, much to a frustration of people. But that's, I guess, the way it is.
Yeah, I think for me it's worth a try, isn't it? We know that we've got a lack of properties and suitable properties. It's just ensuring that we get the right people in the right place. Have I got any further questions?
Can I jump in, Councillor Kirby? I think I'm also familiar with incentive schemes in other boroughs that I've worked in, so I think it's something we can go back to the registered providers about. So if somebody's living in a 4-bedroom property and doesn't need it, it's about how that conversation happens. I mean, the policy could help cover it, but I think to some extent it's how we approach that knowledge. Clearly that will help us with our family pressures. So we could take that away.
Yeah, I've seen it done elsewhere. I think the challenge is why we're not doing it in Dorset.
I think you'll find that it is done, but not on not at scale, Chairman.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, and then as there's no one else in here, and actually, funnily enough, Tony Orford brought it up, but it was around the amount of in terms of savings. So I think it's I can't even find my notes now, but it's regarding the amount of funds that people have in terms of their. So it's on number 17. So £60,000 I think is too high in terms of that's the limit, isn't it? So anything above that, and they won't be accepted onto the housing register. I think £60,000 is set way too high. I think that I think if someone's got £60,000 in assets or in the bank, then they could probably afford to put a hefty deposit down on a house or go into private rented accommodation. Andrew, do you want to answer that one for me, please?
I think you might. Yeah, Sharon might.
Or Sharon
add into the discussion, because that is something that we discussed, and I think we actually lowered it because it was higher than that before, Chairman.
Yeah, before Sharon comes in, Tony, do you want to expand? Because I'm quite aware I'm stealing your point. Tony Orford. No, Sharon, do you want to start?
Councillor Orford, you're muted.
Okay, I think somebody must be muting me. I must be misbehaving.
You're on the naughty list. Tony, point.
What I was going to suggest was that we talk about income of 60,000, and in my opinion, if a family has income of 60,000, it could be two earners there, that may well not be enough for them to buy a property on the open market. So I would suggest that income figure is rather too low. And then assets. You think about assets a bit different. That may be available resources that could be used in buying a house. I don't know. So I think maybe there is a formula. I'd be interested in understanding it a bit further.
Yeah, I think we're disagreeing. I think if you've got two people with an income of 30k, they can probably go out and buy a house. But there we go.
I will make a remark, which is that mortgages are very difficult to obtain these days.
Oh, you're telling me, Tony? They are, yeah. Graham, do you want to come in on that?
Well, no, I'm going to let Sharon answer, because she was part of this conversation with the EAP, and I think that, yeah, I mean, one man's meat's another man's, isn't it? I mean, you think it's too high, Tony thinks it's too low. I think it's about right, because a lot of consideration went into that. There are other buying options, but I think, if you have, an income of 60 grand a year, you really don't need to be on our housing register. Yeah. You could probably survive out there on your own, or there's a lot more people with earning an awful lot less that needs are greater. Let's put it that way. Sharon, can you remember how I think it was 80,000, wasn't it, before?
I think I don't think it was 80,000. I think it's a similar figure. It may have been in going up that high, but the alternative method of looking at this, rather than having a financial figure as a lump sum, is to look at the local housing allowance. And Sarah and I did a little calculation on it to work out it would be about 45,000 a year if you were looking at a 3-bed, or 59,000 if you were looking at a 4-bed. And I just think it's trying to capture that it could be an finance from different sources, and trying to take a middle ground, and to do something that is similar to lots of other areas. It's not excessive, it's not too little in comparison to other areas. So we've gone very middle ground, really, and it is really focusing on those that have a need, and there isn't an alternative, a suitable alternative, which might be private renting rather than actually purchasing, or it could be doing the part by part rent. So it's trying to filter that you've got different opinions. It's very difficult to actually say exactly which one is right, but we've taken that balanced approach. I think that was the intention.
Yeah,
And
thank you, Sharon.
I mean, it doesn't preclude. I was going to call it seniors, the over 55s for older people accommodation, but that includes myself, and I don't feel like a senior just yet. But I mean, it does mean that if someone wants to downsize to one of our over 55s accommodation, but they do have savings over 60k, they're not precluded from doing that. Therefore, it brings a property back onto the market, even though it may be in the private sector. I'll just throw that into the mix, Chairman.
No, that's fine. That makes sense. I think where I was going with this is just ensuring that it was our most vulnerable that we're looking to home. I think usually if someone's got I know that that's not always the case, but and it sounds a bit flippant, but sometimes the most vulnerable are usually those with the least amount of money.
Needs based, Chairman. Needs based.
Yeah, you're right. That's the way forwards. Okay. Well, if I've got no further questions, I'm gonna go to recommendations. Okay, so I've got to scroll all the way up now. Tell you what, it's really difficult doing it on one computer. What I need to have is multiple computers.
Chairman, the recommendation is that members of the committee recommend that the Cabinet endorse the work of the EA Executive Advisory Panel and recommend to full council the adoption of the allocations policy, delegation of authority to the portfolio holder for housing and community safety to make minor amendments to the policy, and any amendments necessary to reflect legislative change. George, if you scroll up, I don't know if there's any more, but I think that's it.
Yeah. So my
the recommendation, Chairman.
Fabulous. Thank you, Tony. Can I have a seconder with that then? For that, then, please. Fabulous. And I'm going to assume that we're all in favour.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, and thank you. That's a really concise policy, and there's obviously been a lot that's gone into that. So I love it. We're having quite a nice housing themed day today. So we'll crack on with agenda item 6, which is the Housing Standards Enforcement Policy Statement of Principles for Determining Financial Penalties 2020 to 2025. And we're going to have Graham, would you like to introduce, or would you like to leave it to Richard or one of the other teams? It's not quite so monotonous.
Are you going to be monotonous, Chairman? Very dare you. So the committee's being asked to consider recommending to Cabinet the adoption of the new Housing Standards Enforcement Policy. The policy is contained within Appendix 1 of the report. The Council's Housing Standards team has a duty to respond to requests about poor housing conditions, and this policy provides officers with guidance to assist them in making proportionate and fair enforcement decisions. The team has a wide range of powers, from serving legal notices, prohibiting the use of buildings, to prosecuting offenders and issuing penalty notices. Action can be taken against houses, flats, houses in multiple occupation, empty homes and park homes. So rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, the policy aims to ensure that action is taken that is safe and legal and appropriate to the specific aspect of each case, considering many factors, including the evidence available and the public interest. The policy is primarily aimed at a minority of property owners, landlords and letting agents who fail to provide accommodation that is safe and does not meet minimum housing standards, who the government has termed rogue landlords. This action ensures that a wide range of homes, generally rented homes, are safer to live in and that minimum standards are met. This helps to protect people's health and safety, reduces accidents, improves well-being and generally improves our communities for the good. The policy accounts for a wide range of new housing enforcement powers, including the enforcement of minimum energy efficiency standards in a rented home, new electrical safety standards, including updated fees and charges for relevant actions and licenses. However, in general, the policy is not significantly different from those of the original sovereign councils, and I'm hoping that you'll recommend that Cabinet adopt this policy, Chairman. I've got Steve Marches on hand, who's done some really good work recently, and I'd invite him to share that with your members. Really interesting, because we all know in our own areas where we've seen empty homes and things, and it's about the carrot and the stick, isn't it, Chairman, and giving our officers the tools with which to work. And I think for me that's really important, that they have those tools. Not only do they have them, but they use them, because I think historically we may not have been using those, but it's time for a change, especially well, I'll come back to you. I'll stop talking, Chairman.
Yeah, go on. Let's hear from Steve. Steve March. Good paper. Come on in, Steve.
Thank you, Chairman.
Steve, can you put your camera on, please?
There we are. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to present the report to you, and look forward to getting your recommendations as we take it towards Cabinet. Yeah, it's been quite an interesting time over the last couple of months. I think the team in the past has generally been quite reactive in nature, so a lot of action that we've taken is in response to service requests from tenants and property owners. Councillor Carr-Jones was referring to some more proactive work, enforcement work that we've been undertaking recently, which is in relation to long-term empty properties. In the past, we've very much taken an informal approach in relation to these properties, perhaps encouraging and advising empty homes owners to bring them back into use. More recently, we've been lucky enough to be allocated some capital funds to progress what is termed compulsory purchase orders, to engage with owners of long-term empty properties and say, well, look, if you're not going to bring this property back into use voluntarily, and we still offer that as an option, then we will, buy your property by compulsion through an application to the Secretary of State. What we're finding is that as we take that more strict approach, if you like, with property owners, then many of them start to engage without the need to progress that all the way through to a compulsory purchase order. There will be cases where that's necessary, but in the vast majority, just showing the stick, as Graham refers, and knowing that we will go through with that through to completion has been sufficient already in the very early stage of this policy, which has probably been in place now only for a few months. So I was able to share with Councillor Carr-Jones and Councillor Kirby the progress we've made on 5 or 6 cases in various areas across the county, and this is an approach that we're taking in other areas in relation to the policy as well, with proactive efforts in relation to the enforcement of housing standards in Weymouth, for example, where we've had particular issues with high proportion of rented accommodation, which may require a different approach, a more proactive approach rather than a reactive approach, and also projects in relation to minimum efficiency of properties that now have, if they're rented, have to meet a minimum standard of energy efficiency, and we've had a project ongoing with letting agents initially to ensure that properties are appropriately marketed with the information available to tenants, and that those assessments are undertaken, and to ensure that properties aren't being let out which fail to meet the standard. So that balance now between a reactive approach and a proactive approach. Thank you, Chairman.
Fabulous, thank you, Steve. Do I have any questions for Stephen regarding the policy? It's just so good, Steve. It's just so good. I'll start the ball rolling then. Oh, there we go. Got Tony. There you go, straight in there. Tony Alford.
Can you unmute your mic, please?
There we are. The essence of my question refers to the risk assessment, which has a rating of low. Now, I'm tempted to suggest that in any regulatory system, so I'm not just talking specifically about this one here, but in any regulatory system, there is always the risk of regulatory failure, and there can be consequences as a result of that, and potentially quite serious. So I sort of see some difficulty in this classification of low here. I could perhaps support the idea if you could convince me that you've got systems and procedures that would capture all the issues that you should be capturing, and maybe some comment on that in that respect will be useful. So I think that would be helpful. Also, I will say we're trying to secure the support of landlords, etc. And I think that the way we conduct ourselves, the way we provide information and make it easy for landlords to do the right thing, that can make a lot of difference. If we've got systems and procedures that will deliver that, I find it useful to know about it. Thank you.
Okay, Stephen, do you want to come back on Tony's question, Tony Alford's question?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, yeah. In relation to risk, I guess this document, I see it as a whole thing as a sort of risk reduction tool in itself. We employ environmental health professionals to undertake the work that we do. We have access into legal services team who we consult regularly over the work that we carry out to ensure that our actions are safe, legal and proportionate. So I think in relation to that, and we also have procedure documents and close supervision of staff to ensure that processes and procedures are followed accurately. So in reviewing the sort of the risk matrix that is presented as part of the report process, that's why the conclusion was taken that the risks involved are low, because there are various sort of mitigating factors in place to control that. I think in relation to the second part of the question, this is there's a wide range of work that we undertake to engage with landlords, and this is the enforcement policy, so it deals very much with the enforcement aspect of our work. But there's also other areas of work that we undertake where we engage with landlords proactively to ensure that we get compliance through other routes. So one example of that is the council's landlord local authority partnership, or LLAP for short, which some members may be aware of. This it's been sort of stifled somewhat through coronavirus, but it used to involve regular meetings with landlord representatives and landlords and letting agents, and was a very useful way to engage with landlords and show, perhaps, Councillor Carr-Jones referred to the carrot side. This was, sorry, the stick side. This was the carrot side of our engagement with landlords. So there is a balance between the two. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but please feel free to come back to me if you have any further any further comments on that.
Chairman, can I just add a little bit in there, Chairman?
Mate, Graham, go for it.
Yeah, because thanks, Stephen. I think one of the things post-COVID we had, and the last landlords forum meeting that I attended, there were a lot of landlords that were quite vexed and about the possibility of us introducing a selective license scheme, and I worked with the officers very hard to understand what was involved in selective licensing, and the option was to say, actually, do you know what, I wasn't, Chairman, you were on the EAP with me, and you'll recall that it wasn't a favour of mine. I think that we've got a much better option to work with the landlords, and of course, as Steve March has said, we will always seek the path of least resistance with landlords. We're not looking for confrontation, but what we do need is for landlords to comply with the regulations. And if they don't want to play, then well, in comes Steve with his stick. And I think that's the point. Is that it's not what we want. We wouldn't actively seek that, but we do need those tools when people don't want to respond. And that's his evidence to us that actually when you do show people that we mean business, they actually get on and do something. And so perhaps it's just that absolutely, you know, showing landlords that we actually mean business. And I think that's where I think we've got to toughen up, Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, if may I come in? It's Richard.
Yeah, Andrew. I'm sorry, Richard. You go for it.
Yeah, just to give 2 points really to add to the comments that Steve has made. One is about the context, just to let members see how many cases we are actually dealing with in a formal way. Just so in 2019-20 last year, my team dealt with just over 300 odd formal complaints about privately rented property. In total, we served 42 notices. So it's just over 10% of cases where we've taken formal action. But of those notices, quite a few of them are requests for information. So it's like a prerequisite to taking formal action. So where we request the ownership details of a property. And even just taking that action, again, it gives the message to the people that we're dealing with that we are serious. And again, the actual number of formal notices where we're demanding works are done is down in the sort of the handful, 10 to 15 per year, and we don't envisage that rising from this policy. That's not the intention. The intention of this policy is that it underpins our decision making. Just one other point about the question about how we make our decisions. It's a really good point, because the Housing Act requires us, when we do serve notice, to state exactly what that is called a statement of reasons, and it is where we write down our reasoning for taking formal action and what we have considered, and what other action we have considered, i.e. non-formal action, and why we have decided to take formal action. And that document actually forms part of any appeal process, so that is effectively the decision-making process of the council. So we do provide that information already.
Fab. Tony A, are you happy with that? Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Rebecca Knox.
Thanks, Chairman. I think this is to actually just to follow up from what Richard said. So Richard, you said that we'd had 300 formal complaints in 2019 and 42 went on to notices. I'm actually interested in those 300 minus 42. So we're still left with 200 and whatever it is, 58. How are they resolved? Because I have a feeling, and this is just sort of instinct, and the email boxes, these are the ones that tend to end up with the elected members, i.e. that they've made a complaint, they're living in a standard of a condition in a house, and it's not good, and there are rats and there's mold. But if there is no formal complaint or a notice given, how are those being resolved? Because it seems to me that many of these don't get resolved, and hence we get people asking to be moved and go on the housing register again because of the property being in a state which is, in their view and probably many other people's views, uninhabitable.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll come back on that question, and I'm sure Steve can probably chip in as well, being closer to the coalface and actually dealing with these complaints as well. Yeah, I would just say, Rebecca, that the many of these we'll call them service requests rather than complaints, but as I referred to them earlier, but many of them are resolved informally where the landlord does the work that we ask them to do. There are cases where the perception of the tenant is high, and damp and mould is the classic case where complaints about what in a statutory sense is quite a low risk to us, because we assess properties based on the risk to people's health. And the perception for the tenant may be that it is a serious problem, but in terms of the risk to their health, it isn't. And you're quite right, some of those cases do end up in complaints to councillors. But the legal standards are minimum. Effectively, we enforce the minimum legal standards that the government require us to do. Steve, I don't know if you want to come in on that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think regulatory activity involves a wide range of actions. Not just serving notices, prohibition notices, or prosecuting offenders. We find that we may initially engage with a landlord and find that they are relatively obstructive to what we're proposing, and then through working with them, we can achieve the outcomes that are required, and sometimes that can lead to the property being improved and no formal action being taken, which doesn't show up on the statistics that Richard has cited. Also, we have developed sort of protocols in working with registered social landlords. So we work in partnership with them to resolve issues in their stock. So again, that will show up as activity, but it's very unlikely to result in formal action. I think one thing that members perhaps useful to focus on is that socially rented properties, the condition of the stock is actually very good in relation to private rented sector. The properties have maintenance plans and are generally well maintained when compared to the private rented sector, but we still receive a proportion of inquiries from their tenants, which mainly because they have quite good security of tenure, whereas private rented tenants are sometimes disincentivized from complaining because they're concerned about their security of their tenancy and potentially losing that tenancy as a result of raising concerns about the condition of their property. So yeah, I agree with what Richard said, that there's a wide range of actions that we take. It doesn't necessarily always involve formal action.
Rebecca Knox, are you happy with that?
I just wanted to follow up on just, if I might, just very briefly. And I think that it really was the private rented sector I was focusing on, because there can be intimidation, and as we've just heard, that there is some fear that they might be out on the streets, even though they're at the same time complaining about the standard of the property they're in. And I think Steve mentioned there were some statistics we don't record, and they're positives. I've always found this very odd, that we record a measure that we take as a result of a regulatory need, but actually we don't record some of the activity that we've taken in order to prevent a chaotic outcome, which would lead to the necessity for more regulatory activity. So I always go back to the prevent agenda. If we prevented chaos, if we prevented even a slight change which would adversely affect a family or an individual, I think we should be recording that. That's a really positive thing, and we can therefore evidence how good prevention policy is. And we miss a trick there. Anyway, that's just a comment, really. Don't expect to.
No, I'd agree with you, and I think that my challenge is on Steve to think of ways that we can do that, really.
I think that's a good point. I think that's something we already do try and capture that information through the use of our database. Officers have the ability to record where there's been an improvement in the property, although we haven't served a notice. I think the reason for just perhaps providing statistics around the amount of notices served was because I suppose it's the enforcement policy, and we want to outline the amount of true regulatory activity we've undertaken. I mean, to add to Richard's statistics, the amount of regulatory activity in relation to notices, etc., is increasing. Last year there were 20 notices served from the 1st of April to the end of October, and in the same time this year we've served double that amount, which we've served 40 notices. And I think so this, it does show that there is increased activity in this area. But yes, we do gather that information around informal actions which lead to improvement, and we can share that information with members after the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I come in, Mr. Chairman? Very quick point.
Yeah, go for it, Richard.
Steve alluded to the fact that he'd recently provided Councillor Carr-Jones with an update on our activity in empty properties, and we're working on this in terms of how we communicate our work to councillors and members and the wider public, and so that's an ongoing piece of work at the moment, and how we provide that information in a way that's useful for people to understand, because obviously sometimes these they are nuanced, some of these figures, and just by providing a box with figures in doesn't tell the whole story. But it's a piece of work we're working on, and we're keen to try and let everybody know the work that we're doing.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah,
go on, Graham.
If I may, just that Richard's comments are part of where I'm going with saying, housing needs to up its game in terms of giving members more information, more of a briefing, and these are the kind of things that we want to draw out and provide you with the information on. I think some of what Rebecca was talking about just now, you may find comfort in the next paper in terms of the private housing assistance policy. So I'll just leave that there, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So moving on, I'm just thinking about, from my concerns are around enforcement. And Steve, you are naturally a small team. How are we going to? I know it alludes to it in 4.2.2, but how are we going to ensure that we are going around and we are targeting what limited resources there are really? And I think there's a wealth of information out there that we can utilise, but how are we doing that? And I think, again, taking on Rebecca Knox's point about, regarding, you've got some really vulnerable people out there, especially in private accommodation, that are absolutely terrified of approaching the council. And I know that there's government policies in place in terms of trying to protect them, but the reality is that they may not be aware of that, or they may still just be incredibly worried about their any repercussions from their landlords. So if you could expand on that, that'd be useful, and then see if we can bring out any decent policies. Graham, you want to answer that, do you?
Well, I just wanted to comment on it, Chairman, because you're absolutely right in terms of the enforcement. And one of the things I think is we need to do as a council is to send our message out loud and clear that we are enforcing, and I think that's part of our communications, that we actually tell people what we're doing, because if landlords get wind of the fact that we're going to start enforcing against them, they may start being a bit more proactive to keep us off their tails, and that's what I'm hoping. And so there's a comms message here about getting that message out there, and also the ability from the team to have that capacity. And yes, we are a small team, but I think that if we focus that capacity on a small area, hard hit, make it count, and show to the public out there that we absolutely mean business, I think that it may be a prophecy that fulfills itself, Chairman.
I think, thank you, Graham. I think one of my concerns is that there is a huge amount of information out there, and that's available to the council. I mean, for instance, like the council tax, etc. You've got people that may be visiting a property, say, for instance, like health visitors. How are we ensuring that information is coming across to you and that's actually being utilised? I mean, there's people that can pick up on issues when they go into a home, or So I think my challenge is there. I mean, I think that 4.2.2 is just a little bit weak. It would be my challenge.
Okay, I mean, thank you, Chairman. You're probably aware of the project ongoing in Weymouth at the moment, where the council has secured funding from DCLG to undertake targeted enforcement in that area, and this involves engaging a company who we provide data to, council tax data, minimum energy efficiency standard data, housing benefit data, and they sweep up all this information to then identify for us high risk properties, which will then be inspected proactively, to ensure that property improvements are undertaken. So that's just one example where that is taking place, where we're using that information, that intelligence, to bring that all together to target the work that we're undertaking. I think you're right. I think, historically the service has been reactive, so it's relied on tenants contacting the council, and so that's sort of self-selecting in a way, and we obviously have a duty to respond to those inquiries, and it's looking at, well, how do we apply the rest of our resources to carry out that proactive work. So one area that's particularly an issue at the moment is around minimum energy efficiency standards, and that data, because landlords now have to achieve a certain standard, and if they can't, they need to register an exemption, then we're going to start a new project around looking at that exemption register, because that exemption register will include all properties that are of low energy efficiency, so we can focus work on that area. So that's another way of proactively looking at properties that are more at risk. But I agree, there's more that can be done in this area to cross-reference, say for example, information about older people that might be on benefit, who are more susceptible to the cold, those in rented accommodation occupying cold, leaky houses, bringing that information together to then target enforcement activity. And at the present time, it's just a matter of resources and where we target that attention, and probably at the moment that emphasis is on current projects in Weymouth, where there's high elements of rented accommodation, high elements of non-compliance with standards.
You see, so I don't know if other members feel the same, but my view would be, why are we not doing targeted enforcement across the whole of Dorset? And that would be very much my steer. And I think we've got in this policy, you've got the stick, and you've got a bit of carrot there as well coming. So yeah, why is it not being implemented? And that would be very much my steer. I don't know if anyone else feels similar.
Mr. Chairman, if I may come in on that. That, as in the policy before, this is the beginning of the policy, and as you can see, the idea of targeted enforcement and being proactive is being introduced, which was not something we previously did. The advantage of doing of what we're doing at the moment is that all of the work that we're currently doing in Weymouth is directly repeatable across Dorset. So there's no sort of benefit lost by sort of ploughing ahead with the work we're doing in Weymouth, where there's arguably the highest need and the worst properties. But all of that knowledge that we gain from that is directly transferable to the rest of Dorset.
I've got Rebecca Knox that would like to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it just goes on to what you were saying, and also in response to, I think that was that Richard.
Yeah.
There should be. I don't know if it's still active. It probably is less active, but there's safe and independent living policy, which of course means that the agencies who visit various people in their homes for whatever reason can actually direct to others where they feel that that person or family needs some help. And I know, Chairman, you're very aware of that due to your community safety work. Now, I just wonder, one, that's probably maybe less targeted at the moment because of COVID restrictions, but it should be there. It should work. It is simple, but is housing part of that safe and independent living activity? I know it is in adult social care and children's services, and it with the police and the fire service, but maybe housing officers haven't been included. I'm not sure. If they're not, then it would be great to look into it.
Yeah, I agree, Rebecca.
I'll come in on that, Councillor.
Yeah,
yes, we are. We were actually instrumental right from the very beginning of the setting up of the Safe and Independent Living Scheme, and yeah, referrals do come in through us through sale forms, and also for adaptations as well for disabled people. So across the range of different aspects of the Safe and Independent Living Scheme.
Okay, well, I hope it's still active and working.
Okay, I've got Andrew. Andrew wants to come in as well. Andrew Bellini.
Yeah. Hello. Just a brief point. I mean, it's partly to try to piece together the points that have been made. I think it isn't just a spectrum of carrot and stick. I think that it's picking up on the point that Graham was saying about publicity. It's about making sure that we're clear about setting the rules, what the council stands for, and make that strong. And sometimes it will be big stick. Sometimes it will be just encourage and enable and advise, in this instance, good landlords to be better. Because often it's a case of, in my experience, a case of incompetence rather than being a bad landlord. So it's about how we get that sort of different routes to the same conclusion. It's pulling together the various points that have been made. And Councillor Knox's point also is there's particularly keen to I think there is good joining up between various directorates, partnerships, etc. But that could clearly always be better. So I think it's particularly around, given we've just had through council the community safety plan, other forms of partnership, is about how we approach enforcement and these things we're discussing today in a broader way. And the publicity piece could just as easily be around a piece of planning enforcement or other areas of work that we engage with, but we sell a good message for the council if we join that up sensibly. How does that make sense? So I think publicity and making a clear statement is part of what we're talking about, as well as the operational carrot and stick issues we've been discussing.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Stella, you've indicated you're right to speak.
When the enforcement work is being done, how do we ensure that tenants aren't put into even worse positions while walls are being knocked around or new heating is being put in? Does somebody check that they don't suffer even more for a temporary period?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you just repeat the last bit of the question, please, Councillor Jones?
Yeah, when work is being done in one of these properties, do we ensure that the tenants are able to live in the property in comfort and not suffer even more hardships while the work is being done?
Yeah, so it's a tricky question to answer because the amount of the type of work that's being carried out varies dramatically. When we undertake enforcement action, we're required to take into account the views of the occupant and the views of the owner to arrive at an appropriate decision. So obviously the work that we're requiring varies dramatically from work that can be quite minor to work that can be quite disruptive to the occupant, as you say. So by involving them in that decision-making process, there can be a sort of weighing up sort of process as to whether, can they remain in the property? Is it safe for them to remain in the property while the work's being carried out? Should some sort of alternative provision be made by the landlord while that work's being carried out? Or is the work so disruptive that they can no longer stay there? So, to answer the question, I just think that it is that those details are taken into account, and sometimes we will be led by the tenant as to whether that they want the work to be undertaken, whether they will be willing to experience a small amount of disruption for long-term benefit. So through that consultation sort of process, those views will be taken into account so that we're not it's striking that balance between forcing on an occupant, some unexpected consequences of getting us involved, which can sometimes be the case, that they may complain about issue A, and actually we're not concerned about that issue. We're actually concerned about something completely different in the property that they hadn't recognised, but then we have a duty to deal with. So I'm confident that that is taken into account. And in cases, for example, with heating, then we've arranged for alternative heating provision to be made in properties through portable heating, that sort of thing. So there are practical examples of interim measures being put in place while works are being undertaken.
Stella, are you happy with that?
Yeah, I just wondered if we as a council actually helped tenants if they have to move out to find new property, or do we just leave it to the tenant to find somewhere else?
I think that would be covered in the housing allocations policy if it was a hazardous one. But I tell you what, though, so I do take
by case basis, I think, Jim.
Yeah, case by case basis. But I think where actually Stella is correct, is that actually there's nothing formal and there's nothing in the there's actually nothing really in the paper. It's all about the enforcement of the landlord. But actually Stella's right. There's little in terms of actually ensuring that our people are kept safe and well during any work. So I wonder if that's something we can address, Steve. It's actually formally written down.
Yes, I think that's probably right. The document is primarily focusing on the regulatory decisions and ensuring that they're accurate and appropriate, and the document perhaps isn't intended to deal with that wider area, other than to say that we take into account their views in our enforcement activity. We have had a conversation about that. This is quite a niched document really that just deals with the enforcement of housing conditions, and there are wider issues at play here. I mean, there's 3 documents before the committee all about housing, and they all come at it from a slightly different angle, and I think we're obviously being we're under a time constraint to get these policies in place as soon as possible to ensure that we have joined up service provision across the county, but the gaps almost would be best completed by some sort of wider strategy. Historically, we did have private sector housing strategies that would provide a more rounded offer to residents about the type of service we're offering in private sector housing. We take into account things we offer to tenants, the informal work that we do, the informal offer to landlords, for example. So I think that isn't captured in this document, and perhaps there's scope to bring that together in the future in some other
that sounds like it can come to us when it's at its nice embryonic stage. Okay, I mean, I agree with Stella. It would be nice if there was something down in there regarding supporting those people that are out, may have to leave their home, etc. I know that there's they may incur financial penalties, but I think that I'm happy with that for me forwards. Okay, if there's
Sorry, Chairman. I was going to quickly say that there's a very close working relationship between the Housing Standards team and the Housing Services team in relation to this area of work. So there is that cross-working when we deal with cases of when an applicant cites poor housing conditions as part of their application. They will very often be referred to the Housing Standards team, and that's where there's a very careful liaison between the 2 teams, because one part of the housing allocations team may be seeking to see how that person's banding could be improved, but the housing standards team is looking, well, how can we improve this property and maintain it so that they can it provides a safe home. So, but there is that close contact between the 2 teams, and where it's appropriate for somebody to move in those circumstances, then that decision would be made. But our preference is that we want the property improved. That's the key thing. We don't want the individual moved and then the property stay in poor condition. So that is something that we do have a close eye on when we progress with these cases, but those links are in place to ensure that it's joined up between the 2 teams.
Fabulous. Thank you for that one, Steve. I'm going to crack on now. So I'll go to the recommendations. Okay, so the recommendation is that the People, Health and Scrutiny Committee recommend to Cabinet that they adopt a housing standards enforcement policy and the statement of principles for determining financial penalties 2020 to 2025 attached as the appendix to this report. Now, I'm happy. May I have? Oh, sorry, Tony. Do you want to come in? Tony.
Yes. Can I just ask for scrutiny to be amended to overview? In the first line. At the People and Health Overview Committee.
Well spotted.
You've had your coffee today, Tony.
Yes, very much so.
You're on it. You're on it. Brilliant. Yeah, I agree. Can we have a proposal to change that then, please? So, Tony, if you're happy to propose that change, is anyone happy to second that change? Come on, you lot, get your mic.
Oh, go on then. Go on.
Yeah,
then.
go on, Stella. Fab. So I'm going to. So now I'm going to propose that. I'm going to go back to the recommendation. So that the wording would be that the People and Health Overview Committee recommend to Cabinet that they adopt the housing standards enforcement policy. So can I have a proposer for that recommendation then, please?
Happy to propose, Chairman.
Thank you. And seconded. Thank you. All right, brilliant. Thank you very much. And Steve, that's really good. That was a really good policy, and you can tell that you've worked very, very hard on that. We crack on. So we are on to agenda item 7, which is the private sector housing assistance policy.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll give a crack at this. The committee is being asked to consider approving the private sector housing assistance policy to Cabinet. The policy is contained in Appendix 1 of the report. The policy sets out how the council can help to improve private sector housing in a number of different ways, which includes adaptations for disabled people, handy van services, improving energy efficiency, bringing property up to a decent home standard, and repairing and improving older park homes. The policy includes the details of how grants and loans are administered and, importantly, sets the eligibility criteria for those applying. In April 2019, the existing housing assistance policies from the districts and borough councils novated over to Dorset Council. Now, although these policies were similar, there are differences, which means that currently there's an uneven playing field across Dorset. For example, someone living in East Dorset cannot currently access Decent Homes loan, whereas someone living in West Dorset can, and the policy seeks to resolve this issue. Funding for the grants and loans comes from a variety of different sources, some of which are from annual government grants, such as those for adaptations for disabled people, and loans are funded from a capital pot held by a community interest company called Lendology CIC. The policy introduces a new loan product to help people with energy efficiency and renewable energy works in response to the council declaring a climate emergency. Contributing to tackling CO2 emissions and Healthy Homes Dorset scheme helps people with pre-existing health conditions access ECO and the new Green Homes grant by providing small but essential grants. A good example here would be funding of clearing out the loft space to prepare it for insulation, which is something that isn't covered by ECO grants. The equality and impact assessment for the policy found that there were no negative impacts on any of the defined groups, and the policy has a positive impact on a number of others, including age, disability, carers, rural isolation, single parent families, poverty, and people in the military. Once approved, that policy and assistance within will be publicised to encourage take-up of the various elements of assistance within the policy. Chairman, I'll draw your attention to table in the Appendix 2 of the report, which sets out the main changes compared to the existing policies. And I'm hoping that the People and Health Overview Committee will support this policy and recommend it to Council. and if also the corporate director of housing and community safety, in conjunction with myself, is delegated authority to make any minor changes to the policy on an as when required basis. You're muted.
Thank you, Graham. Fab. All right. There's no presentation on this, is there, Graham? So no one to speak to it. So we'll crack on. We'll move on with the questions. Does anyone have any burning questions that they would like to put to Graham? Okay. There we go. Tony A.
Yes, just one question. I believe I'm right in saying that assistance under these various schemes can be used in conjunction with, say, a commercial borrowing. Now, given that we are giving effectively subsidised finance through these arrangements, I just wonder how a subsidised support scheme works with commercial loans, because you start to think, well, if somebody can afford a commercial loan, then they should be securing that loan for the whole of their project cost, rather than combining it with some of the subsidised offering that we have available.
Thank you, Tony. Who would like to come in?
I can come in on that one. It's a very good question, because in some cases there may well be a commercial loan involved in someone improving their property. So we'll be talking here about home owners rather than people who are living in rented property. In most of the cases where we're involved, the reason that we are involved is that the people cannot access commercial loans. And for the reason there will be a risk element to taking up a commercial loan, and they in those cases would have been refused a loan. So our focus of our loans are on those people who, for whatever reason, maybe, for example, they have had some default on previous loans, have been refused assistance. So inherently the loans that we're offering have a risk to them. The actual amount of default on the loans that Lendology are giving actually is really low, and the reason that it is low is that we have a range of loan options that are designed to suit the actual applicant. We'd be much more flexible, for example, in the amount of repayments, for example, so that we're less likely to have defaults. So yeah, the point, Councillor Orford, is that we're not trying to compete with the commercial market. If someone can get a commercial loan, they would be encouraged to do so. The point of the loans that we offer is that they're targeted at the people that can't access commercial credit.
Okay, Tony, do you want to come back on that one? Are you happy?
No, the answer is understood. Thank you.
Yeah, fine. I was going to do a bit about out of the box thinking, and I know that it's not in there, but my passion is younger people, and particularly around adopting and fostering. Now, I know that one of the biggest limits to people becoming foster carers is that they don't have the space, i.e. they don't have the right amount of bedrooms. Is there any thought to providing loans to people to be able to create a second bedroom or a third bedroom if they're registered foster carers?
I think, Mr. Chairman, that's the point of the recommendation 2 in the report, is that we can consider things like that. Certainly that hasn't been considered as part of previously and part of this policy, but certainly it's something we'd need to have some thought on, and but potentially the loans that we offer could be extended to do that. I think that's something I'll take away from this meeting, and maybe have some further thought on.
Do any of the other members think that's a good idea, or am I barking at the wrong tree? It'd be nice to have a bit of support.
I think it's an excellent idea.
Yeah, same here.
Me too.
From here.
Good idea.
Excellent. Okay, there we go. We've got a nice policy win.
Chairman,
Yeah,
can I say something on that one, please?
Yes, you may.
When we were doing the previous policy, we were looking at housing allocations and foster carers because there was a mismatch between being able to allow someone to have more space so that they could then foster, but you couldn't do it until they were actually fostering, so it created quite a difficulty. So something like this, where there perhaps can be a grant to enable changes to be made, would be a step forward.
Yeah, I agree, Tony. I think that we could take some of the wording. Well, we'll leave the officers to do that, but in terms around I think it was the people that have recently registered to become foster carers or have been through the training. I'm not quite sure, but you're absolutely right. But if we were able to make loans, loans or available to those foster carers, and that would be brilliant. That'd be a real win-win, I think, for Dorset Council, because I know full well, even with myself, we can't foster because we don't have enough bedrooms, and I think that's what comes back quite often. So it'd be really good if when the foster teams are going out there and they're finding people and they think, do you know what, you haven't got quite enough space, but it's okay because we can give you a loan. That would be a lovely way of doing it. So fab. So if we put that through as a potential policy, that'd be amazing. There we go. And Andrew, do you want to come into that as well?
I briefly put it in the chat chat bar. I think it's just yes. I think we'll pick that up with children's services as well. I think it's often the case of it's a bit like the previous point that's been made. It's about connecting up the various drivers, and it could make good financial sense to either give a grant or, in social, back to the allocations policy, provide a transfer to a bigger property if it's a social housing tenant to allow fostering to happen. So we'll take that back.
All right. Are there any further questions on the grants? No, fabulous. Okay, all right. I think we've all had a quick look through. What I'll do is I'll take it through to the recommendations. Some good news in there. So the private sector housing assistance policy. So I'll take them on group. That the People and Health Overview Committee recommend to Cabinet that they adopt the Dorset Council Private Sector Housing Assistance Policy as attached as Appendix 1 to this report. And then 2, that the authority be delegated to the Corporate Director of Housing and Community Safety in consultation with the portfolio holder housing to A, make minor amendments to the policy to comply with the legislation and guidance, B, suspend the approval of discretionary housing assistance offered in this policy, and C, introduce new assistance to help private residential property should funding become available. Okay, may I have a proposal for that, please?
Yes.
Fabulous, thank you, Tony.
Seconded.
Seconded, fabulous. It seems to be a bit of a pattern. Okay, brilliant. All right, let's move on.
Sorry, Chairman, does everybody else agree?
I'm assuming so because nobody said otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there we go. All agreed.
Thank you, Chairman, for all your support from the committee this morning. Much appreciated, and thanks to the officers for being there and answering all your questions.
Well, thank you, Graham, for attending, and thank you, officers, for coming along. It's been a really lovely housing-themed session, which is brilliant. And I think before we move on, I think it's worth noting that as part of the remit of this group was to help develop policy through workshops, and I think that you've approached the committee, haven't you, Graham, with regards to a workshop moving forwards in terms of. Well, do you want to explain that? I think it's probably best come from you, Graham, in terms of your problem.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I did allude to it in my introduction somewhere in one of the policies this morning, saying that I'd like your help with the homelessness strategy that's coming forward. Now, we've got to work at pace. We haven't a lot of time, so it may be that you're going to have some a meeting that isn't in your particular diary, because I'm working with Amber from the Neil Moreland to help us pull this together. So nearer when I can nail them down to some dates, I'd like you and the committee to actually contribute to the work of the new homeless strategy.
Fabulous. Okay, so we've got a workshop coming our way.
Yes, indeed.
If you want to be involved. Fabulous. Thank you, Graham. Okay, and on that note, we will move forward. So we're now onto the the committee's forward plan and cabinet's forward plan. Where I challenged cabinet was to and also the senior leadership team was to push forwards and give us areas where they may need support, or from where policies need to be introduced. And some cabinet members have been really quite useful and helpful in terms of bringing through things that they do need support. And Graham Carr-Jones is a good example of that, and Jill Haynes. I think my frustration is that we're still not having those areas coming through, and my view is, well, if we don't have anything useful that we can look at in terms of where then we'll start looking ourselves and start bringing in things that we may like to look at. And I've also said that it would be quite useful if we had an online discussion and we managed to get it through. But if I lost my place now. Sorry, bear with me. My computer's just gone. Where is it? Yeah, so we have the so we have the forward plan, and I think it's a case of where members want to look at things, or if members want to give us a steer of where they'd like to look at things, then the forward plan will be going up online on Teams, and we'll be able to infill it as and when needed. We've got an RTS. Does everyone agree with that? I think for me it was key that the cabinet members had their first say. Pete, come on through.
The only comment I would make is I think it's important that we focus on issues to look at which are actually sort of wide-ranging and are actually a corporate priority rather than our own personal bugbears.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with you, Pete, and that's why I was keen to get those cabinet members to come in and actually say, look, this is where we're struggling. This is where we need help. Could the committee look at it? Tony, do you want to come in? Tony C.
I did. I noticed that we've got some EAPs to report on the forward plan, and obviously the transitions is something that is of real importance. There's so many issues where we're dealing with people that are no longer children, but then fall short of the offer from adults. So we've really got to fill that gap and make sure that it is a seamless transition, because we're failing a whole generation of youngsters.
Yeah, I agree. It'd be something really interesting to look at. I've also said, I know we're not doing personal bugbears, but one of the things I'm quite interested in are things like children that care for people, young people that care for people, young carers. Laura Miller.
Hello. Hello, Chair. Thank you. Hello, Andrew. Thank you very much. I will try. There we go. Okay. Sorry, new house. BT not quite on message yet. All I wanted to say really is I am now left with two lead members, one of whom is Simon Gibson, who we've had conversations about how he actually takes on the shaping of overview and scrutiny and really works with the chairs to work out, how we shape this to get the best bang for our buck, I suppose, collectively. And I absolutely agree with Tony. The transformation that we're looking at in adults also takes account of the fact that we are part of the children's board that looks at strengthening services right across the whole piece. So I just wanted to put my 6 eggs in 5 eggs, however many eggs the saying goes, and say that we will be looking to develop that really effective partnership and I welcome the chance to do that. So thank you. I think it's a really, really good move going forward.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
No, that's thank you, Laura. I think from my point of view, it's get it right first time, and it's really important that we get the full plan right. So I know I've been a bit slow in terms of doing it, but I think the worst case scenario is we have a forward plan that doesn't relate to what the council's doing, and I think that's what was previously going on. Peter Wharf, I've got. There we go, Deputy Leader.
Thanks. Sorry, trying to switch camera on and mic on at the same time. Thank you very much. Well chaired. I would point out that I am in conversation with you and Daryl, and we're having a meeting later this week to discuss how you can take forward the EAP on recovery and reset. And it's quite an interesting task because it spreads across both of the overview committees. So I was a bit disappointed that you didn't mention that I'm working with you on that. And I think that's going to be very exciting. And I think you thought that.
You stole my thunder. It was next on my list.
Yeah. Right. So seriously, there is a huge job of work to be done there. And I'm looking forward to you and Daryl deciding how you're going to structure that, because that's quite a big decision. All I want is that, and the note you've just recently sent me, I just wanted to say the thing you said, which I so agree with, is it's really important that we continue with this at pace and that there isn't any slowing down whilst people clear their throats and work out what they're going to do. Yeah,
I agree, Peter, and I think taking the learning from things like COVID are going to be really important, because COVID's still very much out there. And actually some of the learning's just really good. So I think where there was perhaps some concerns is how the capacity around, not quite so much for your EAP, but the capacity around workshops. And that's where I think that there has to be that clarity, and that's why so Graham's workshop coming up will be more of a tester, rather than me sliding in loads of exciting workshops that I'd love to do. Perhaps I was jumping the gun a little bit, and I think it's a case of, well, let's see. Actually, Vivian Broadhouse was really good, and she said, look, we'll see how it goes with Graham's one, and we'll reform. I think yours is slightly different, Peter, because we do need that. My view is that we need a decent day. We need to stick both the committees together, and have a proper session. So on that note, councillors, we're looking forward to two workshops, with obviously with Peter's being quite a substantial piece of work, hopefully coming up within the next few weeks.
That's fine, Chair, and I'm still not entirely convinced that a workshop is the right way of doing it. It may be, but I think you forgive me for appearing to teach Granny how to suck eggs. I think you'll need to think it through so that you don't just repeat the work, and I do think there are a number of issues that you will need to drill down into a fair bit of detail quite quickly on.
Yeah, I agree. I think perhaps we might have a little look to see how best it is, and I throw it over to members in terms of how it may like to work the look. I think obviously there's the issue of time.
Yeah, I understand that, and there's the issue of capacity and democratic services assistance, and I take that, and we're discussing that when we meet later on this week.
I think the steer is that we would like, for something like the EAP on reset and recovery, and to take the learning from that, we'd need quite a chunk of support. Okay, all right.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for coming in. So I'm happy with that. Are members happy with the way that we're moving forwards with that?
Yes, agreed.
Great.
Excellent.
Yes,
Thank you.
Andrew, it's Rebecca.
Yes, Rebecca.
So on our forward plan at the moment, we don't have an item on for December or March, but taking into account what Tony Coombs and Laura said, can one of those, because I'm with them on this transition issue. We must get it right next year. Particularly, we've got to start and do this pace. Is there enough information now for us to look at something? It's not necessarily a decision that goes to cabinet, but we are developing policy, and we might be able to have some suggestions coming from. Well,
I'm happy to slot it. I'm happy to slot that in.
Laura and Andrew, perhaps, some sticky issues that the both of them have got. We don't actually, as I said, we don't have to take things to cabinet. We can chew them about in a meeting.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're good for. I think that's what we're there for, is to chew things out, discuss things, and explore things. Laura, are you happy with that? Look, Councillor Miller. I think she's done. She's gone. I'm happy.
Yes, yes, I do. Sorry, stupid internet. Yes, I do.
Fine. And Ryan Holloway has just said that I missed out Stella. Stella Jones, Councillor Jones. Sorry, how can I miss you out?
I don't know. I'm sitting here waiting.
You know, you can just get rowdy and just
I will have shouted at you in a minute. Yeah. The transition EPA, which was set up a year ago, hasn't yet met. And I think this is important. We've got to get meeting and then we can decide what we're doing about transition. But it was set up a year ago and hasn't met yet. So can we make sure that meets very, very quickly? And secondly, your working groups, how are you going to get membership of the working groups organised?
I'll tell you what, Slow, that's a good point. If I start with the working groups first, I think that they're going to be voluntary. So if I throw it out to people that may have an interest within the committee, that would be my view. And then secondly, regarding the sorry, I've done the points the wrong way around. Regarding the EAP, I'm quite keen that we don't have hundreds of EAPs. If Peter's still around, then he may support me on this. But I think that the whole point of having these policy bodies is to look at things like the EAPs. I know there's still several outstanding EAPs, but if that EAP hasn't met, then we should be doing the work of that EAP. So it should just be coming straight to us, which would be my view. So that's why I'm more than happy to have it in December.
I'm quite happy as long as we are talking about it. Should have been talking about it a long time ago.
Yeah, okay, I agree. So let's do that in for December. Peter, do you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, just to confirm that we have taken a very deliberate decision that we are going to be winding up EAPs other than the local plan. And we're going to be moving those to the overview committees because we believe that they are responsible and have a job to develop policy. And it's now, you know, the EAPs were set up in order to move at pace before we had this new committee structure. Now we've got it. It's important that we stop doing things the old way and move them into your type of committees so that you can shape policy and then move it towards the cabinet.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, sorry, I got Councillor Parry. Just very briefly, because I'm aware that we're 1 minute late now. Andrew Parry.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby, and thanks to your committee for your work, in particular in regard to provision for foster children in housing development. What I did want to suggest to you that has consistently come up in all levels of discussion with children and young people is I think we need your committee to give consideration to holding an inquiry day in respect of children and young people's mental health and well-being. And I see that as being a very positive thing. We have consistently heard from them that they have a concern in this area, and I want us as a council body and our policy formally to have a mechanism that has taken into account their concerns, to understand what pastoral care they are currently receiving, what additional care that they need in order to build resilience in testing times, and where we see instances of crisis, that those can be reduced as speedily as possible for our young people. Hope, Chair, you and your committee would give consideration to such a way being had.
Fab, it'll be put on the list then, Andrew, and I think that's something we can certainly consider. Thank you, Councillor Parry. Okay, all right, I'm going to move forwards now because we're a whole 3 minutes late from finishing. Do we have any urgent items?
No, Chairman.
Which is a no. No. And we also have no exempt business either.
That's correct.
Fabulous. So I can now close the meeting. And Helen, would you just mention when the next meeting is?
14th of December.
Okay, so the next formal meeting is on the 14th of December, but expect 2 workshops before that time.